David Grayson was halfway through reheating last night's pizza when he heard the knock on the door, not the polite, rhythmically casual knock of a neighbor borrowing sugar, but a firm, deliberate pounding that made his one-bedroom house shudder like a scolded child. "Who knocks like that at 9 o'clock at night?" he muttered, abandoning the microwave mid-whir. David opened the door cautiously, one hand clutching the edge like a shield. He was greeted by the sight of a woman, if woman could stretch to include someone who stood at least 7 feet tall, with metallic skin that shimmered like a moonlit lake and eyes that glowed faintly green. Her armor looked like a cross between a knight's plate and the exoskeleton of some alien predator, complete with jagged edges and glowing sigils that pulsed like a heartbeat. "You are David Grayson?" she asked, her voice a rich, resonant tone that carried authority and a hint of exasperation, as though she'd traveled light years only to be mildly disappointed. Sometimes," David managed, clutching the door tighter. She stepped forward, and David instinctively stepped back. "I am Karina Valdor of the Valaxan Dominion. I owe you my life, human." David blinked. "Well, that's nice of you to say. Did I lend you a charger or something?" Karina tilted her head, her glowing eyes narrowing slightly. "7 years ago you saved me from certain death. It is my people's most sacred code. A life saved is a life owed. I am here to repay my debt." "Saved your life?" David's voice cracked like dry leaves. He did a mental inventory of the last decade of his largely uneventful life. "Are you sure it was me? Maybe there's another David Grayson. Tall guy, heroic jawline. Looks like he knows what he's doing." Her expression didn't budge. "There is no mistake. You are the one." David's brain felt like an overheating computer. He vaguely remembered a bizarre meteor shower years ago that had interrupted a particularly depressing Tuesday. Had he done something heroic? Maybe nudged a stray space rock with a laser pointer? Before he could delve deeper into his flawed recollection, Karina knelt on one knee, her armor creaking faintly. "I pledge my service to you for 5 rotations of your sun." She bowed her head, which made her look even more intimidating. "Your will is my command." David stared at her, slack-jawed. Okay. First of all, you might be overselling this a little. I don't even remember saving your life, so maybe we could just call it even, shake hands, and move on." Karina stood, her expression solemn. "To refuse a Valaxan life debt is to dishonor our ancient traditions. Do you wish to offend my people and risk the wrath of the High Council?" David gulped. "I don't want to offend anyone, especially not someone with glowing armor and a sword that looks like it could cut reality in half." He chuckled nervously, glancing at the massive blade strapped to her back. "It has cut reality in half," Karina said matter-of-factly. David sighed. "Of course it has." He rubbed his temples. "Look, Miss Valdor, was it? I live a very boring life. My biggest accomplishment this week was beating a coworker at fantasy football. You don't want to waste your 5 years of servitude here. Surely there's someone out there who needs a warrior more than I do." Karina's glowing eyes softened, just a fraction. "It is not about need. It is about honor. You saved my life, and by the ancient oaths of my people, I am bound to yours." "Great," David muttered, closing the door halfway to block out her intensity. "An alien warrior with a sense of duty shows up, and I'm not even wearing socks." David eventually invited Karina inside, mostly because her presence on his doorstep was attracting the attention of his overly curious neighbors. She ducked through the doorway, her armor glinting under the dim glow of his kitchen lights. "This is your dwelling?" she asked, her glowing eyes scanning the modest furniture, scattered pizza boxes, and a precariously leaning tower of coffee mugs. "Yup, welcome to the Grayson Fortress," he said, spreading his arms dramatically. "Try not to trip on the carpet, otherwise I'll owe you a life debt." Karina didn't laugh, but she stared at the microwave like it might spring to life and attack. "What is this contraption? Some kind of tactical scanner?" "That," David said, pointing. "It's a microwave. You know, for heating up food. Not very tactical unless you're fighting frozen pizza rolls. Karina approached it cautiously. Your kind fights with food? No, well, not intentionally, David said. He paused, considering his college days. Okay, maybe sometimes. The rest of the evening was a bizarre mix of Karina explaining her people's customs and David trying to convince her he wasn't worth all this trouble. He offered her his fold-out couch, though she insisted on sleeping in an upright position near the door to guard the perimeter. As David crawled into bed, he couldn't help but laugh quietly to himself. An alien warrior woman had just declared herself his servant. Tomorrow he would wake up, discover it was all a dream, and go back to his normal, boring life. Right? David woke up to a sound that could only be described as metal grinding against doom. He sat up abruptly, his heart racing. It wasn't an alarm, nor his phone buzzing, nor the clatter of his neighbor's lawnmower. It was coming from his kitchen. He stumbled out of bed, still wearing last night's pizza-stained shirt, and froze in the doorway. Karina stood in front of the sink, holding what appeared to be his largest kitchen knife. The blade was glowing faintly blue, and she was scraping it along what looked like a makeshift forge she'd assembled from a toaster and some aluminum foil. "What are you doing?" David blurted. Karina turned to face him, her expression calm. "Sharpening your weaponry. I noted the subpar state of your kitchen armaments and took action." "My... what?" David blinked, then pointed at the knife. "That's for cutting vegetables, not intergalactic warfare." She frowned, her metallic brows furrowing. "You prepare sustenance with this blade? It is woefully dull. How do you defend yourself during mealtime skirmishes?" "Because I don't have mealtime skirmishes." David threw his hands up. "I use it to slice onions and maybe fend off the occasional burnt crust, not battle space invaders." Karina gave him a skeptical look. "You have not lived a very exciting life, have you?" "Not unless you count losing a Monopoly game in under 10 minutes, he muttered, snatching the knife away. Before he could launch into a lecture on Earth culinary practices, there was a knock at the door. This time, a gentle tap, tap, tap that screamed, "Nosy neighbor alert." David groaned. "Oh no, please tell me you didn't stand by the window with your glowing sword." Karina crossed her arms, the very picture of defiance. "I do not cower in shadows. I am Karina Valdor of the Valaksan Dominion." "That's exactly what I was afraid of." David sighed, heading toward the door. Sure enough, it was Carol from next door, the neighborhood's self-appointed gossip queen. Her smile was as sharp as a paper cut, and her eyes darted suspiciously past David into his house. "Morning, David," she chirped. "I couldn't help but notice you had company last night." David forced a grin. "Yeah, just an old friend. Visiting." Carol's eyes narrowed. "An old friend? Interesting. Because from my window she looked like some kind of cosplayer? Or maybe one of those performance artists?" Karina chose that moment to stride into view, her glowing armor and 7-foot stature obliterating any hope of subtlety. "David, your neighbor is armed with pastries," she announced, pointing at Carol's Tupperware. David turned back, his face a mask of horror. "Karina, that's not a weapon. That's banana bread." Carol's jaw dropped. Is she part of some theater troupe?" "Yes," David blurted, nodding furiously. "She's, method acting for a new sci-fi play. Very dedicated. Won't break character for anything." Karina raised an eyebrow but stayed silent, clearly unsure whether David was lying or just malfunctioning. "Well, that explains a lot," Carol said, her tone dripping with skepticism. She handed him the Tupperware, her gaze flickering between them. "I made too much banana bread. Thought you might like some." David accepted the container like it was a peace offering. "Thanks, Carol. Really appreciate it." As soon as she left, David closed the door and leaned against it, exhaling like he'd just defused a bomb. "You called me an actor," Karina said, her voice tinged with faint indignation. "It was that or tell her the truth," David hissed. And if I told her the truth, the next thing you know, we'd have the government, the press, and probably a reality TV crew camping on my lawn. Karina seemed to consider this, then nodded. Deception to avoid unnecessary chaos. A wise strategy. David rolled his eyes. Glad you approve. Later that day, David decided it was time to introduce Karina to the basics of Earth life, starting with the grocery store. This turned out to be a mistake. From the moment they walked in, Karina treated the fluorescent-lit aisles like a tactical battleground. She scrutinized the automatic doors with suspicion, muttering something about hidden sentries. Relax, David whispered as he grabbed a shopping cart. Nobody's ambushing anyone in the frozen food section. Karina followed closely, her gaze darting between shoppers' shelves and the suspiciously colorful packaging of breakfast cereals. Why do your rations come in so many shapes and colors? Is this psychological warfare? It's marketing, David said. Kind of like warfare, but with fewer lasers. Things escalated in the produce section when Karina spotted a man weighing apples and assumed he was measuring munitions. She nearly drew her blade before David intervened, dragging her toward the canned goods aisle and whispering frantically about blending in. The final disaster struck at the checkout counter. Karina, unfamiliar with Earth currency, mistook the price scanner for a hostile device and attempted to neutralize it. David had to step in, apologizing profusely to a very startled cashier, while Karina stood stoically, arms crossed. Back at the house, David collapsed onto the couch, clutching his forehead. That was the single most stressful trip to the store I've ever had. Karina stood by the window, her gaze fixed on the horizon. Your world is strange. So fragile, yet so resilient. David looked up, surprised by the unexpected note of reflection in her voice. Resilient? You mean like surviving a trip to the grocery store? Karina turned, her glowing eyes softer than usual. Your people endure despite your weaknesses. You build lives filled with laughter and light, even in the face of uncertainty. It is remarkable. David chuckled. Yeah, we're a real inspiration. Masters of burnt toast and awkward conversations. Karina tilted her head, the corner of her mouth twitching in what might have been a smile. Perhaps I underestimated you, David Grayson. Well, don't get too impressed, he said, gesturing toward the banana bread, because I'm about to eat half this loaf and call it dinner. Karina crossed the room and sat across from him, her imposing armor creaking slightly. A warrior must know when to rest and when to prepare for battle. Tonight, we rest. David stared at her, then grinned. You're starting to get the hang of this Earth thing, aren't you? Her expression softened further, and for the first time Karina laughed, a low, rumbling sound that filled the room. And for the first time in days, David felt like maybe, just maybe, this whole alien warrior roommate situation wasn't going to be so bad after all. The sun gleamed weakly through a veil of clouds as David parked his well-worn sedan in the lot of Patel's grocery emporium. The towering sign, shaped like an anthropomorphic carrot giving a thumbs up, cast a long shadow over the lot. Karina eyed it suspiciously from the passenger seat. Is this one of your planet's ceremonial leaders? She asked, her voice laced with doubt. David blinked, following her gaze to the grinning carrot. You mean the carrot mascot? No, just advertising. Nobody worships it, unless you count a few weird vegans. Karina tilted her head, as though the concept of advertising was more alien than anything she'd encountered in her travels across the stars. A creature so absurdly cheerful would not survive on my homeworld. Well, lucky for him, he's just paint and plywood, David muttered, sliding out of the car. Now come on, first rule of grocery shopping, grab a cart. Karina followed him toward the entrance, her imposing form turning heads even before the automatic doors swooshed open. The fluorescent lights buzzed above them like a swarm of robotic insects, and Karina paused, her eyes narrowing as she scanned the bustling interior. Why does it smell of Processed sugars and despair, she murmured. That's capitalism for you, David said with a shrug. Stick close, and please, for the love of everything holy, don't draw your sword. Karina's hand hovered near the hilt of her blade, which she'd begrudgingly agreed to conceal under a long patchwork coat David had found in his closet. It looked like something a medieval knight might wear on casual Fridays, but at least it helped her blend in. Sort of. Things started relatively smoothly in the produce section, though David quickly realized he'd underestimated Karina's commitment to overthinking. She squinted at a pyramid of apples, then poked one with her armored finger. These are fruits, correct? Yup, David said, dropping a few into the cart. Good for you, full of vitamins. Karina picked up an apple and studied it as though it held the secrets of the universe. It is symmetrical yet flawed, a strange metaphor for your species. It's just an apple, David replied, exasperated. Eat it or don't, but for the love of all things good, stop philosophizing about it. She frowned, then placed the apple back on the pile with the reverence of someone returning an ancient relic. Moments later, she discovered bananas and demanded an explanation for their peelable armor, which led to a 5-minute detour as David explained how fruit worked. The cereal aisle was a disaster waiting to happen. Karina halted mid-step, her glowing eyes fixating on the rows of brightly colored boxes featuring cartoon mascots and overly enthusiastic promises of fun. What is this? She demanded, pointing at a box of Choco Boom clusters featuring a grinning robot. It's cereal, David said wearily. You eat it with milk. Karina picked up the box and frowned at the image of the robot throwing chocolate-covered chunks into the air like confetti. This creature, it appears to be weaponizing your food. Trust me, it's not that deep, David said, though it does feel like an attack on my wallet. Karina shook the box, listening to the pieces rattle inside. Then she leaned close to whisper, Are your young ones so unruly that you must bribe them with confectionery explosives? David couldn't help but laugh. Pretty much, yeah. He grabbed a box of his usual cereal and nudged her forward. Come on, let's keep moving before you find something else to overanalyze. By the time they reached the register, David was counting the seconds until he could escape. Karina, on the other hand, seemed to have gained a newfound appreciation for Earth's bizarre rituals. She eyed the conveyor belt with fascination, watching as the cashier, a bored teenager with purple streaks in her hair, scanned items with a rhythmic beep, beep, beep. What is the purpose of this scanning device? Karina asked, leaning slightly over the counter. It's how they calculate the total, David explained. Just let her do her thing, okay? But Karina wasn't so easily pacified. When the scanner emitted a particularly loud beep, she jerked back, her hand flying to her concealed blade. Easy, David hissed, grabbing her arm. It's not an attack, it's just the barcode. Karina relaxed, barely, but the cashier was now eyeing them with a mixture of curiosity and mild concern. Is she, like, in a Ren fair or something? The girl asked, chewing gum noisily. Something like that, David muttered. She's, very committed to the role. Karina tilted her head. What is a Ren fair? Is it a sacred earth gathering? Not now, David whispered, shoving his credit card into the machine. Back in the car, David let out a long, exasperated sigh. That was an experience. Karina, sitting with a bag of groceries balanced on her lap, looked unperturbed. Your customs are strange, but not without purpose. This grocery shopping is a test of endurance, resourcefulness, and patience. It explains much about your people's resilience. Yeah, well, next time you're going alone, David said, rubbing his temples. Karina smirked faintly, a rare expression that made her seem almost approachable. I believe I handled myself admirably. No enemies were slain, and no treaties were broken. High bar you've set there, David muttered. As they pulled into the driveway, Karina leaned back in her seat, her gaze drifting toward the horizon. Your world is peculiar, chaotic yet vibrant. I did not expect it to feel so alive. David glanced at her, surprised by the wistfulness in her tone. Yeah, well, we do our best. Even if our best involves arguing over coupons and buying overpriced cereal. Karina chuckled softly, a sound that seemed almost out of place coming from her. Perhaps your chaos is what makes your people so intriguing. David snorted. Trust me, the intrigue wears off fast. Now let's get these groceries inside before the neighbor shows up again. As they carried the bags into the house, David couldn't shake the feeling that his life had turned into the weirdest buddy comedy in the galaxy, and somehow, against all odds, he didn't entirely hate it. David wasn't sure what woke him first, the steady, mechanical whirring or the faint glow emanating from under his bathroom door. Groggy but curious, he stumbled down the hallway, rubbing his eyes. He paused outside the bathroom and knocked lightly. Karina, you in there? The door slid open. Not swung, slid. This was the first sign that something was terribly, terribly wrong. His once ordinary bathroom had been transformed into what could only be described as a techno-dystopian spa. Pipes gleamed with alien metals that hummed faintly, pulsating with an eerie green light. The showerhead had been replaced with a spherical contraption spinning softly, spitting out mist that shimmered like starlight. Karina stood at the sink, her hands covered in a translucent blue gel, tinkering with what had once been his faucet. David blinked. What have you done? Karina turned, looking almost proud. I have enhanced your water filtration system. The technology was primitive, barely functional. You should now have triple the water efficiency and a purification system capable of neutralizing toxins on a molecular level. David stared at her slack-jawed. You turned my bathroom into a sci-fi fever dream. She raised an eyebrow. It is vastly improved. Do you not agree? No, I don't agree. David gestured wildly at the room. Why does the toilet glow? Karina glanced over her shoulder at the softly pulsating commode. That is a minor side effect of the stabilization matrix. Perfectly harmless. In fact, it now processes waste with 98.3% efficiency. Great. My bathroom's efficient enough to power a spaceship, but can I still flush it? Karina frowned, clearly perplexed by his lack of enthusiasm. Of course, it is functional, though I would recommend avoiding excessive use of your earth substance known as toilet paper. The system may view it as a contaminant. David let out a long, anguished groan. Karina, I don't need my bathroom to neutralize toxins or stabilize matrices. I just need it to be normal. She tilted her head. Normal is a subjective term. By Valak-San standards, this is quite mundane. David waved a hand at the alien showerhead. That thing looks like it's about to teleport me to another dimension. Karina's lips twitched, almost forming a smile. If it malfunctions, it might, though I calibrated it to Earth frequencies, so the likelihood is low. Low? David pressed a hand to his temple. Okay, new rule. No more upgrades without asking me first. Deal. Karina crossed her arms, clearly unimpressed. If you insist on living with suboptimal technology, that is your choice. David sighed and pinched the bridge of his nose. I'm going back to bed. If the shower starts talking, I don't want to know. The next morning, David trudged into the kitchen to find Karina already at the table, surrounded by what looked like holographic blueprints. She glanced up briefly as he shuffled to the coffee maker. You seem fatigued, she remarked. That's what happens when you spend all night wondering if your plumbing's going to stage a coup, David grumbled, pouring himself a cup. Karina ignored his tone, gesturing to the glowing blueprints. I have been analyzing your dwelling. There are numerous areas for improvement. David stared at her over his coffee mug. Please tell me you're not planning to turn my toaster into a laser cannon. Your toaster is inefficient but harmless, she said. However, your energy grid is laughably outdated. I could install a zero-point reactor in your basement. David choked on his coffee. A reactor? Do you have any idea how illegal that probably is? Karina frowned. Your laws are unnecessarily restrictive. On Valaxis, efficiency is paramount. Well, here on Earth, we have this little thing called Not blowing up the neighborhood, David shot back. She smirked faintly. You exaggerate. A reactor would only cause an explosion if improperly maintained. Great. I'll sleep better knowing that. Their debate was interrupted by a knock at the door. David froze, his mug halfway to his lips. Please tell me that's not Carol again, he muttered, setting the coffee down. Karina was already moving toward the door, her hand resting instinctively on her concealed blade. David hurried after her, catching her arm before she could open it. Remember, he whispered, no swords, no threats, and no glowing armor. Just act normal. Karina raised an eyebrow but stepped back, allowing David to answer the door. To his surprise, it wasn't Carol. Instead, a man in a dark suit and sunglasses stood on the porch, holding a briefcase. He looked like he'd stepped straight out of a government conspiracy film. David Grayson? The man asked, his voice as neutral as his expression. David felt a cold knot form in his stomach. Yeah. Who's asking? The man didn't answer immediately. Instead, he glanced past David into the house, his gaze briefly lingering on Karina, who was now leaning casually against the wall in the least casual way possible. I represent a research division, the man said cryptically. We've received reports of unusual energy readings in this area. David forced a laugh that sounded more nervous than he intended. Energy readings? In this house? Must be a mistake. The only energy here comes from my coffee maker. The man's expression didn't change. We would like to conduct a brief survey. Routine procedure. Karina stepped forward, her presence immediately shifting the atmosphere. He said there is nothing unusual here. Perhaps you should move along. The man's eyes narrowed slightly behind his sunglasses. And you are... David jumped in before Karina could answer. She's my cousin, visiting from out of town, big into, cosplay. The man's gaze lingered on Karina for a moment longer before he nodded slowly. Very well, but we may return with more questions. As he turned and walked away, David closed the door and leaned against it, exhaling sharply. Karina tilted her head. That man was not here for routine procedures. No kidding, David muttered. That was either government, military, or some secret organization that watches too many alien movies. She straightened, her expression serious. If they return, I will ensure they do not discover my presence. David groaned. No swords, no plasma cannons. Just let me handle it, okay? Karina smirked faintly. As you wish, David Grayson. But know this. Your world's secrecy is far more fragile than you realize. David sighed, his shoulders sagging. Yeah, I'm starting to figure that out. He glanced toward the living room, where faint green light from the bathroom still spilled into the hallway. Life with Karina was anything but normal, and it was becoming increasingly clear that normal was no longer an option. David stood in the kitchen, staring at the collection of ingredients strewn across the counter. A carton of eggs, a bag of flour, and a container of milk sat next to a jar of suspiciously orange jam he'd found at the back of a cupboard. Karina loomed beside him, her arms crossed, her face a mask of dubious anticipation. Explain again, she said, her tone bordering on a command. What is the purpose of this ritual? It's not a ritual, David sighed. It's cooking. You know, making food from scratch. It's kind of a basic human skill. Karina narrowed her glowing eyes. On Valaxis, sustenance is engineered for maximum efficiency. Cooking is considered an outdated practice. Well, on Earth we like our food to taste good, David replied, cracking an egg into a bowl. And since you insist on learning about my culture, this is part of it. Karina studied the egg with suspicion as the yolk settled into the bowl. It appears fragile and vulnerable. A poor design for a food source. David chuckled. Yeah, eggs aren't exactly battle-ready, but they're versatile. Watch. He reached for the whisk, but Karina was faster. She snatched it from his hand and inspected it, her expression a mix of curiosity and mild disdain. "This weapon is poorly constructed," she said, giving it an experimental shake. "It would not withstand combat." "It's not a weapon," David exclaimed, laughing. "It's a whisk. You use it to mix things." Karina frowned, then tentatively dipped the whisk into the bowl and began stirring. Her movements were precise but overly forceful, sending bits of egg flying. "Okay, maybe less enthusiasm," David said, stepping in to guide her hand. David had planned to keep things simple. Pancakes were foolproof, right? But he'd underestimated the chaotic energy Karina brought to the table. When it came time to pour the batter onto the griddle, Karina insisted on using a ladle she'd found in the drawer. It was 3 sizes too big, resulting in pancakes the size of manhole covers. "These are combat-worthy," she declared, flipping one with a flourish. David sighed. "They're not shields. They're supposed to be edible." Karina ignored him, eyeing the sizzling pancake with satisfaction. "If your enemies knew you could weaponize food, they would fear you more." "Well, at least they smell good," David muttered, reaching for a plate. Karina frowned suddenly, her gaze fixed on the griddle. "What is that noise?" David paused, listening. A faint, high-pitched hum was emanating from somewhere nearby. "That doesn't sound normal," he admitted. Karina's eyes narrowed. She turned off the griddle and scanned the room, her warrior instincts kicking in. "It is an energy signature, unfamiliar but strong." David's stomach sank. "Please tell me this isn't another side effect of your bathroom upgrade." Karina ignored him, striding toward the back door. The hum grew louder as she approached, and when she opened the door, the source of the sound became clear. Hovering just above the yard was a small, sleek drone. Its metallic surface gleamed in the sunlight, and its tiny rotors whirred with precision. "What the—" David began, but Karina was already moving. With a speed that defied logic, she drew her sword and leapt toward the drone. The blade glowed faintly as it sliced through the air, narrowly missing the drone as it darted out of reach. "Hey! No dismembering my lawn ornaments!" David yelled, running after her. "This is no ornament," Karina snapped, her gaze fixed on the drone. "It is a reconnaissance device." David's eyes widened. "You mean someone spying on us?" "On me," Karina corrected, lunging again. This time, her blade connected, and the drone emitted a sharp crackle before plummeting to the ground. Karina crouched beside the wreckage, inspecting it closely. "Its design is crude but functional. This is not Valixen technology." "Then whose is it?" David asked, peering over her shoulder. Karina frowned. "Uncertain. But its purpose was clear. Surveillance." David groaned. "Great. First the guy in the suit, now this. Are we officially in a sci-fi thriller?" Karina didn't respond immediately. She stood, her expression grim. "This complicates matters. If they are aware of my presence, they will not stop until they have answers." David ran a hand through his hair. "Okay, what do we do? Hide? Go off the grid? Build a bunker?" Karina smirked faintly. "You panic too easily, David Grayson. For now, we wait, and we prepare." "Prepare for what?" Her glowing eyes met his. "For war, if necessary." Despite Karina's ominous warning, the rest of the day passed without incident. David tried to distract himself by cleaning up the pancake disaster, while Karina busied herself dismantling the drone for parts. By evening, the tension had eased somewhat, and David found himself on the couch, flipping through channels, while Karina sat cross-legged on the floor, tinkering with the drone's remains. "You know," David said, glancing at her, "this whole alien warrior thing would make a great reality show. Karina versus Earth, pancakes and plumbers." Karina didn't look up. "Your humor is unorthodox but appreciated." David grinned. "I'll take that as a compliment." She held up a small component from the drone, studying it intently. "This device is primitive, but intriguing. Your species has potential, David Grayson, even if your pancakes do not." "Hey, my pancakes were fine," he protested. "It's not my fault you made them the size of dinner plates." Karina's lips twitched in what might have been a smile. Your cooking skills require refinement, but your resilience is admirable. David chuckled. I'll take that as a win. As the evening wore on, the two of them settled into an uneasy truce with the universe. For now, the threats seemed distant, the danger theoretical. But as David drifted off to sleep that night, he couldn't shake the feeling that their quiet little corner of the galaxy was about to get a lot louder. David woke to a sound he could only describe as galactic. It was somewhere between the hum of an electric toothbrush and the roar of an interstellar engine, punctuated by high-pitched bleeps that seemed to come from everywhere at once. He sat up groggily, blinking at the faint green light spilling into his bedroom. "Karina," he called, voice muffled by sleep. "Tell me you're not upgrading the kitchen into a warp drive." There was no response. David shuffled to his feet, the sound growing louder as he followed the glow into the living room. What he saw stopped him cold. Karina stood in the middle of the room, surrounded by a whirlwind of alien technology. Holographic schematics floated in the air, some spinning slowly while others blinked with cryptic symbols. A metallic sphere the size of a beach ball hovered beside her, pulsating with energy. David squinted. "Is that a floating Death Star?" Karina glanced over her shoulder, her expression calm. "It is a portable Valaxan defense node, not a Death Star." David ran a hand through his hair. "Okay, I'm gonna need coffee before we dive into whatever this is." A few minutes later, David sat at the kitchen table with a steaming mug, watching as Karina continued her work. The defense node had sprouted what looked like tiny antennae, each emitting faint arcs of light. "So," David began, "what's the plan?" "Because I'm guessing this isn't about fixing the Wi-Fi." Karina didn't look up. "The surveillance drone was not an isolated incident. I have detected additional signals in the area. It is only a matter of time before they locate us." David took a long sip of coffee. "Fantastic. And by they you mean—" "Unknown," she admitted, "but they possess advanced tracking capabilities. Their interest in me suggests they are not friendly." "Great," David muttered. "So we're basically sitting ducks." Karina straightened, her glowing eyes meeting his. "Not for long. I am constructing a device that will shield this dwelling from detection." David raised an eyebrow. "A cloaking device? Like in the movies?" She tilted her head. "Your Earth media simplifies the concept, but yes, it is similar." He chuckled nervously. "Okay, but, does it come with a warranty? Because I'd really hate for this place to accidentally phase into another dimension." Karina's lips twitched, in what might have been amusement. "Your concerns are unwarranted. The technology is stable." "Sure it is," David said, taking another sip. "And what happens if this fails?" Karina's expression grew serious. "If it fails, we will evacuate. I have already begun preparations." David choked on his coffee. "Evacuate? To where?" Karina gestured toward the corner of the room, where a sleek cylindrical object stood. It looked like a cross between a futuristic elevator and a high-tech closet. "That," she said, "is a portable transport module. It can relocate us to a safe location." David stared at the device. "You built an escape pod in my living room?" Karina nodded. "It is calibrated to Valaxan coordinates, but can be adjusted for Earth travel if necessary." David set his mug down and rubbed his temples. "I can't believe I'm saying this, but how do we know we'll need it? I mean, maybe the people tracking you aren't hostile. Maybe they just want to, I don't know, talk?" Karina's gaze hardened. "In my experience, those who pursue warriors from Valaxis are rarely interested in diplomacy." Their conversation was interrupted by a sharp knock at the door. David froze, his pulse quickening. "Please tell me that's just Carol," he whispered. Karina moved swiftly, drawing her sword as she approached the door. "Stay back," she commanded, her voice low. "Or," David suggested, "we could just not open it?" Karina ignored him, glancing through the peephole. She hesitated, then stepped back, her expression unreadable. "It is not Carol," she said. "But it is not an enemy." David frowned. "What does that mean?" Karina opened the door cautiously, revealing a young man in a bright yellow delivery uniform. He held a package awkwardly in both hands, his expression a mix of confusion and mild terror as he took in Karina's imposing figure. Package for David Grayson? The delivery guy stammered. David hurried forward, grabbing the box. Thanks, have a great day. The delivery guy nodded rapidly and backed away, nearly tripping over the porch steps before fleeing to his van. Karina watched him go, her sword still in hand. Your people are easily intimidated. Yeah, well, not everyone's used to being greeted by an alien warrior with a glowing sword, David said, setting the package on the table. Karina sheathed her blade. What is in the box? David shrugged, cutting it open. Inside was a sleek, rectangular device with a faintly glowing screen. He frowned. I didn't order this. Karina leaned over his shoulder, studying the device. It is not of Earth origin. David groaned. Great, another alien gadget. What does it do? Karina picked it up, her glowing eyes scanning the screen. It appears to be a communication device, and it is active. Before David could respond, the screen flickered, and a holographic image materialized above it. A stern-looking alien with metallic skin and sharp, angular features glared at them. Karina of Valaxis, the alien said, his voice cold and authoritative. You are ordered to surrender yourself immediately. Karina's jaw tightened. And if I refuse? The alien's expression didn't change. Then you and your human companion will face the consequences. David raised a hand. Quick question. What exactly are these consequences? Asking for a friend. The alien ignored him. You have 24 Earth hours to comply. Do not test our patience. The hologram vanished, leaving an ominous silence in its wake. David sank into a chair, his head in his hands. This just keeps getting better and better. Karina placed a hand on his shoulder, her grip firm. Do not fear, David Grayson. We will face this challenge together. He looked up at her, managing a weak smile. You know, for someone who's technically here to serve me, you're doing a great job of dragging me into intergalactic drama. Karina smirked. Consider it an education. David groaned, leaning back in his chair. Great. Can't wait for the final exam. David stood in the middle of his living room, staring at the holographic countdown on the alien device. 23 minutes and 58 seconds remained. He tapped his fingers nervously on the kitchen counter, glancing at Karina, who was calmly sharpening her glowing sword. So, no backup plan? He asked. Just you, me, and your laser sword against a spaceship full of angry aliens? Karina didn't look up. It is not a laser sword, and this is no different from the battles I fought on Valaxis. Strategy and resolve will prevail. Great, David muttered. Good to know we're sticking with optimism. That always works in movies. Karina paused, tilting her head. Your humor masks fear, but fear is unnecessary. Trust in our preparation. David sighed, running a hand through his hair. I trust you, Karina. I really do. But I also trust that my life has turned into a B-movie plot, and those don't usually end well for the guy with no combat skills. Karina allowed herself a faint smirk. You underestimate yourself, David Grayson. You have demonstrated resourcefulness, adaptability, and an unexpected aptitude for pancakes. David chuckled despite himself. High praise from a Valaxian warrior. The countdown reached 0, and the room was bathed in a harsh white light. David shielded his eyes as the light coalesced into a shimmering portal. Through the portal stepped 3 figures, each clad in sleek black armor that glinted with an otherworldly sheen. Their leader, the same stern alien from the hologram, surveyed the room with cold precision. Karina of Valaxis, he intoned, his voice resonating like a drumbeat. You have defied the will of the intergalactic accord. Surrender now. Karina stepped forward, her sword at the ready. I owe allegiance to no one but my savior. Your threats mean nothing to me. David blinked. Quick question, he said, raising a hand. What exactly is the Intergalactic Accord? And do they have a customer service line I can call to file a complaint about being dragged into this mess? The alien leader's gaze flicked to David, his expression unreadable. The human speaks out of turn. Karina's voice was sharp. He is under my protection. You will not harm him. The leader's lip curled. You cling to outdated codes of honor. Your loyalty to this primitive species will be your undoing. Karina didn't flinch. We'll see. Before the situation could escalate into an intergalactic brawl, the defense node Karina had built sprang to life, its antennae extended, emitting a low hum that quickly built to a piercing crescendo. The leader's armor crackled with static, and his subordinates staggered, their movements sluggish. Karina seized the opportunity, disarming one of the soldiers with a swift strike before turning to the leader. David, meanwhile, scrambled to the corner of the room, where Karina had left a small alien device. It looked like a cross between a Rubik's Cube and a mini-fridge, and Karina had referred to it as an auxiliary defense system. Okay, David, he muttered to himself, fiddling with the device. You've watched enough sci-fi to figure this out. Probably. The device beeped as he pressed a series of buttons, and a holographic interface appeared. He stared at the alien symbols, none of which made any sense. Karina, he called. Little help here? She was too busy engaging the leader in a dazzling display of swordplay to respond. David groaned, his fingers flying over the controls in a desperate attempt to activate something. Finally, the device emitted a loud chirp, and a dome of shimmering energy enveloped the room. The leader staggered, his weapon clattering to the floor as the dome's energy disrupted his systems. Karina seized the moment, disarming him and holding her sword to his throat. Yield, she commanded. The leader glared at her but didn't move. This is not over, Karina. The Accord will not forget this insult. Karina's expression was stoic. Let them come. I will be ready. With the invaders subdued and their weapons disabled, Karina activated the portal device, sending them back to their ship. The portal closed with a faint pop, leaving the room eerily quiet. David collapsed onto the couch, his heart pounding. Well, he said, his voice shaky, that was fun. Let's never do it again. Karina sheathed her sword, turning to him. You performed admirably, David Grayson. Your actions were instrumental in our victory. He gave a weak laugh. Thanks, but I think I'll stick to making pancakes. Alien diplomacy is not my thing. Karina sat beside him, her expression softening. You underestimate your potential. Today, you proved that courage is not the absence of fear, but the willingness to act despite it. David smiled faintly. Coming from you, that almost makes me feel like a hero. Over the next few days, life began to settle back into something resembling normalcy. The defense node remained active, cloaking the house from further detection, and Karina devoted herself to repairing the damage from their battle. David found himself reflecting on how much had changed since Karina's arrival. His once quiet life had been upended in ways he could never have imagined, but it had also been enriched by her presence. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the stars, David turned to her. So, what happens now? Are you sticking around for the full 5 years? Karina tilted her head, considering. I made a vow to serve you, and I will honor it. But I suspect our journey is far from over. David chuckled. Yeah, with my luck, we'll probably end up saving the galaxy or something. Karina's lips twitched in a rare smile. Perhaps, but whatever comes, we will face it together. As the stars shimmered overhead, David felt a strange sense of peace. His life might never be the same, but for the first time in years he was okay with that. After all, how many people could say they had an alien warrior woman as their roommate?